Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this two-part episode, I'm joined by Harriet Kemsley to hear about her separation and divorce from fellow comedian Bobby Mair. Harriet is an award-winning comedian, writer and actor. She starred in the Viceland reality sitcom Bobby and Harriet Get Married, which she co-created and co-wrote with her husband Bobby Mair, to huge critical acclaim. She can also be seen on Dave's Hypothetical, ITV's Hey Tracy, Comedy Central's Roast Battle, and is a recurring guest on 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown and 8 out of 10 Cats. Her other credits include hosting the BBC Radio 4 Comedy Club, the Radio 1 Comedy Lounge, BBC Three's Comedy Marathon, and The One Show. Following Bobby's appearance on the podcast, we hear from Harriet and her side of the separation story. It's lovely to listen to how she and Bobby have been able to navigate their separation amicably, prioritising their daughter. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Harriet.
Hi, Kate. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really good. It's a hot one today, isn't it? So I always think in these ones, we always look like we've got no clothes on, but I've worn a deliberately broad-based top, so I don't look like I'm sitting here topless.
And I've done the opposite, so people spend the episode wondering.
If you're actually dressed. Yes. Now, it's really kind of you to join us. Now, some of our listeners may realise we had your ex, Bobby, on recently, and he recorded the podcast for us. So we're now going to hear a different perspective on the breakup and the co-parenting success that you've had since you separated. So I'm really interested to get into this story. But let's start, if you will, by just telling us a little bit about the relationship and, how you met Bobby and how the relationship came to end.
So I met Bobby through doing stand-up. We did a couple of gigs together and then we met properly at a party. He didn't remember me, but we got talking at the party, and I don't know, it was one of those things where I just saw his face, and as I walked around the corner and he just kind of smiled, and I was like, oh no, this is trouble. And we kind of started dating on and off for a bit, and then called it off. And then at the end of the summer in 2012, maybe 2012, we started dating properly. Yeah. And then we got married in 2017, which we made a TV show about, which I think some people think is mad, but we were the writers and creators of it. So we were in control of it. It wasn't that we had these cameras or anyone trying to trick us or anything. It was our story that we were creating. And then we filed for divorce last year.
Do you think doing that kind of bit about the wedding and everything, do you think it had an impact in terms of how you were into it? Or
I don't think so at all. I think if anything, that's something we were really good at together. We were really good at working together. We knew how to make each other funny, and we can write things for each other very easily, which is a hard thing to do for somebody to get your voice. Yeah, so I think that was very much not the problem, actually. I think it was more life stresses that were the issue. We could work together very well, yeah.
And so was it kind of a love at first sight? You fell hard, you fell fast, and it was a kind of roller coaster, or was it more of a slow burn to get together?
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where I saw him and I knew something. It was one of those things where kind of time stops and you're like, what is happening here? And then it took me a while to warm up to him, because he was unlike anyone I'd ever met in my life. And he was very blunt, and I mean, bordering on rude, I would say. And so it took me a long time to kind of see it as something that could be a relationship. But then as he kind of opened up, I saw how kind and generous he is kind of underneath this like brash surface.
It's lovely the way you say he is rather than he was, in that his kind of characteristics endure beyond the relationship, the original relationship you had, because obviously you still got a relationship, haven't you? So tell me about the breakup then. So what do you think started to go wrong in the marriage, and how did you come to a point where you decided, we've got to do something different here?
Yeah, so I think that he's had a lot of difficulties in his life, and he's always worked really hard to overcome them. He spent a lot of money on therapy. We both had. We got banned from couples counselling, so that was something that we couldn't do for very long.
Oh, go on. Why did they ban you from couples counselling?
I think that's not my story to tell. So, yeah, I think what I realized is that it wasn't good enough for our daughter. And so it wasn't good enough for me. And I think it's very hard to overcome patterns that you've had since childhood. And Bobby tried really hard. But I think when we met, we became very codependent, and we would use each other maybe to balance our emotions. And then you have a child and it's not broken. So the only way to break it is to end the relationship. And so I had to end it so that she doesn't grow up and continue the same pattern.
Okay, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because we often say that we get lots of people who feel that staying together for the sake of the child is the most important thing, and a lot of the time, when we're helping co-parents or we're helping people who have decided to split, and they're feeling very guilty about it, we do talk about this a lot. We say that staying together for the children is just such an old-fashioned, sweep it under the carpet idea. So it's really interesting to hear you, say that, articulate that, and to nail it in quite that way. The best interests of a child are served when, like you say, you're not role modeling patterns of behavior that they then take on and repeat. And if
That's it. And
things are
it's so
broken
hard to do
between
it
you,
because that is the narrative, is that you should stay together, you should work on it. I was kind of Googling it, like what is right, what's not right. And kind of the advice out there is just that marriage is hard, it's awful. You just have to
yeah,
keep on going.
keep
And
going. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You just have to kind of suck it up. And I think this way, actually, she will have two parents that are much more peaceful, and she will have the best of both of us because neither of us were being our best selves.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Being your best self is the best role model you can be for a child, isn't it? And if you're in an unhappy marriage and you're role modeling this idea of endurance and sticking out something that, is clearly not working, I don't think that's a good thing for a child. And I think what you've done is not just brave, but it's also very intelligent, because it takes a certain kind of person just to say, okay, I feel in my bones this is not the right thing. I might not be able to, as you say, go out and Google it and get the answer I want, because that's not the common narrative at the moment. But I think we are shifting the narrative. And I think more people are understanding, as you have, that actually what's best for your child is that you've got two happy people involved in their lives, or at least two happy people, because there can always be more, can't there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So when you decided to go your separate ways, how did that unfold? What did you do? Where did you go? What were the next steps? Because I think people listening, it's really hard when you haven't done this to know what the order of play is almost. And where did you woke up one morning, you finally come to that decision. What happened next?
It's so hard. I mean, for me, there was a trigger that I won't speak about, but there was a moment that I knew that it was unsustainable. And I went to see a therapist as well. And that was helpful because I'd been to see therapists before. And I think because they knew Bobby and they liked Bobby, there were many brilliant things about the relationship that they kind of were positive about it and trying to make it work. And then I went to this therapist and told her what was happening. And I could kind of tell from her face that it absolutely wasn't right. And it kind of gave me this validation that I needed. I think it is really helpful to talk to somebody outside of it, because so often your friends or family can't say you should leave, because then you could stay with them and then you're with them and then they have to see this person at Christmas. So it's very difficult in that sense. So I think that definitely helped me make the decision. And Bobby was, I think he knew that he'd got as far as he could and there was nothing else that he could do. And then we tried living together, and I think that lasted 9 days. And then he took himself out of the situation, which was very, I've heard, for all Bobby's faults, I've heard of a lot of partners that make it really difficult, and they refuse to leave. And he really uh, did me and our daughter a really great kindness there by leaving and letting us kind of have our setup and then coming in and out, which I think must have been very difficult for him. And so he went and stayed with a friend. And I think we both just very much put our daughter first, which probably made it more painful for us. I think all the advice I've read about breakups is that you need to completely cut off contact. And that's the way that you heal and you kind of wean yourself off just chemically off somebody. And there was no way to do that because we both wanted to be such a big part of our daughter's life that we wanted to be able to see her every day and not have it that we couldn't see her for a certain amount of time. And so we had to really try and work at managing that. And also our diaries with work are so chaotic. We have to have a joint calendar still so we can kind of pass it back and forth a bit.
It's interesting what you're saying about really what it means to put a child first, because, you ask any parent, they will always say, well, we want to put our child first. But actually doing that, and like you just mentioned there, it was actually harder for the two of you, and being willing to sort of confront that and go through that and make it hard for yourselves in order to get a better outcome for your child, your daughter. It's so interesting how that actually pans out in real life and what it feels like. It's hard, it's easy to say and very hard to do. And sometimes very easy for people to think they're doing the right thing when actually they're making it worse inadvertently and not on purpose. But this whole point about the act of love, of moving out, there's still enough love in the relationship and enough concern and kindness around the relationship to be able to do something like that and not worry about what it's going to mean for you or what a lawyer might say about that or anything like that. Just really putting a child and a family first is very different to saying you're doing it and having a deep sense of self-interest ultimately. So I feel full of admiration that you can do that, because it's very difficult to do and not all of us can. So fair play, Harriet. That sounds amazing. It must have been very difficult trying to work out what was best in terms of how and when somebody was going to come in and out of a house, when all you want, as you say at that point, is a bit of separation. Did you sit down and talk that through? Did it just evolve? How did that part of it happen, where you come to an agreement that you're going to stay in what's been the family home, Bobby's moving out, and then Bobby's going to come back into the home and see your daughter and spend time with her there?
I think that the thinking was that she was so young. I mean, she was only, I think, 15 months old when we broke up. And so he wasn't living anywhere that she could go. And so I think it was definitely very difficult for him to come in and out. And it was very hard to have him here in the space a lot. And I had to learn that I had to leave. And that was so hard. Like, I think that was one of the hardest times, is when he would be in the home with her and I'd have to leave and I'd just go sit in a coffee shop and cry because I just wanted to be with my daughter, and that just wasn't an option. Us spending too much time together was unhealthy, and he deserved his time with her on his own, because I got that as well. And I want her to have a brilliant relationship with him. I think it's really important for both of them. But that was definitely the hardest thing. I think there's so many other things that come up, just with the relationship. It's hard to navigate that when I come back from something and then it's clear that he wants to know what time I'm going to be back so he can go on a date. That's been a very difficult thing to manage. He's been kind of shaving in my sink and leaving his beard hairs there when I know that he's shaving to go see somebody.
Snog somebody else, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But I can suck all that stuff up. Kind of just the hardest bit was being forced to be away from her, because I thought, oh, if we were still together, we could all be in the house together. But now I have to leave her at these points. And I have really just tried to make the best of it. I have spent amazing times with my friends, and I've gone away for certain points so that Bobby could move in and be with her for a week and be with her in the mornings, which was something that he really missed, waking up with her. And so I was like, fine, I'll I'll go on work trips, I'll go on holidays, and I'll just try and let him have that, and then also just try and start my new life, I guess.
What enables somebody to do that? Because not everybody can, and sometimes your senses are overwhelmed with the breakup and the hurt of it. But what's given you the strength to be able to say and make those offers and do those things so that Bobby can have the time as well, so you can share the care?
I think it's just literally that our daughter is just first, and I want her to grow up and see a mother that's living a really full life and that either has a partner that treats her how she will want to be treated one day, or she's happy on her own. And so it's kind of goes against common wisdom in a way that you should be doing everything for your child. But I think that trying to make myself happy is what's going to make her happy. And then those times together will be really good. And equally, that's why I really want me and Bobby really encourage each other to go away and do things that we love. We're really lucky that we have jobs that we love. I think that really helps. But if he's living, I don't want her to grow up with a dad that's miserable or isn't following his dreams, or that's absolutely not the best thing for her.
Yeah, I think it's it's lovely the way you sort of talk about wanting the best for each other, but also wanting to invest that time in yourself. I sometimes think that when things go wrong, it's because somebody is overly focused on their sort of care of the child rather than just thinking that a child needs lots of different inputs and lots of different people around. And sometimes I think we can get very narrowly focused on this notion of a primary carer. And I think it's really quite unhelpful sometimes, even if that's been how people have traditionally brought up children. I think a separation is an opportunity to change things in a positive way so that both parents can have time with the children and both parents can form that very unique and individual bond. And one, I guess, I suppose the big difference is it doesn't involve the other parent. So for the other parent, it can feel quite isolating, as you've described, when it's not your time with your child. And I have a vision of you sitting in the coffee shop and feeling utterly bereft. And I suppose that's one of the hardest things to get your head around, isn't it? When you decide to separate, you are signing up for not necessarily seeing your child every single day and having to adjust your relationship to be able to cope with that as well.
Yeah, I think that I just couldn't bear the thought that if she wanted to see me or I wanted to see her, that we couldn't. And so we just had to make it work. That's it. That was the only option. It was never an option. I think I mean, it's definitely very difficult if you're with somebody that doesn't feel the same. I think I definitely have friends whose partners are not. I think Bobby is very, I guess, thoughtful in that way. Like he was brilliant in many ways, but in that way and in many others, he is. And he's very good at seeing that. And I think other people just, they want revenge. And I just feel so grateful that neither of us has turned nasty, that neither of us has tried to ruin the other one. We're just both sad about it. And we want our daughter to grow up with happy parents.
And do you think that sort of the therapy or the way the relationship broke up, do you think that's impacted how you've been able to move on and co parent? Or do you think it's just a totally separate thing and you've just made a conscious choice that whatever had gone on in the relationship or the breakup, you were going to behave differently?
I think we had been through a lot in the relationship. And I think also because we are so used to talking about things like our relationship, like through work and things like that, we're very honest with each other and we always have been, that probably does help in a way that we have that ability to speak very frankly with each other.
And what do you think was the hardest part of getting a shared care arrangement going then? What were the tricky bits you had to navigate?
I guess having to see him all the time, like it was so unnatural, and sometimes I think for him maybe it felt more real because he'd leave and be living somewhere else, whereas for me he'd be here sometimes and I'd be like, "Oh, there's my husband," and then I'd have to be like, "No, that's that's not it anymore," and I had to keep reminding myself and having to try and make this my space now, but have him often in it. That's not been easy either. But yeah, I think hopefully they say it takes 2 years. So that's what I'm kind of sticking to, that I already feel so much better and we're both much more peaceful, and that in just under a year's time, we'll be over it. That's what I keep hoping.
So you're just over a year into this arrangement then, is that right,
Yeah,
Harriet? So you've
a
been
year and 3
co-parenting for a
months.
year.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So things aren't as raw as they were obviously at the very beginning, and you're getting into the swing of things. But I guess the other complicating factor is that you've got a very young child and they change very, very rapidly, don't they? So I always think it's really weird when people want to have a written down schedule on a piece of paper when you've got really young kids, because in another 2-3 months time you're ripping that up and starting again, because their development is so fast at that age, isn't it, that all the things you might have planned, all the different classes and the pickups and the drop-offs and various else, they all seem to change on an almost kind of monthly basis when they're that age. So how old is your daughter now? Is she
She's 2.5.
2.5? So you've got this period before she goes to school where it can be quite flexible and you can both kind of, be involved and all of the rest of it. How do you navigate that constant sense of change as she grows and her needs change?
To be honest, it's absolutely exhausting. It's completely chaotic because of our jobs. It's just every day is different. That's why we have to work together as well, because every week is different. We might not be in London. We have to use a lot of babysitters. I don't want to use a babysitter I don't know. And so I like to book far in advance and know exactly what's happening. Bobby likes to book a gig in the day before, which then sends me into a spiral because I want to know when my daughter, I like to just know what's happening. And so it's two very different lifestyles there.
Well, let's just dig into that a second then, because that is a very typical thing to negotiate and navigate, isn't it? So one of you has a completely different sort of way of parenting, planned, advanced, organized. The other has the more free flowing, shall we say, chaotic style. What do you and Bobby do to not fall out about that kind of stuff then? Because obviously it works, so it's possible. So it shouldn't be. It's kind of quite a hopeful message in a way, isn't it? If there are people listening who are just thinking, me and my ex are so different, we have such different styles, this is never going to work. But you are sitting here being the epitome of people with two different styles. How do you do it?
Well, we do bicker a lot about it. I think I've had to, it's very difficult. It's that thing you were saying, is you feel like you know best. And I've definitely had to learn to work with Bobby and listen to him, because he is a brilliant dad and he does come with a lot of great ideas. I think that with that, we just have to find a way around it. So Bobby now knows, and I think he does feel the same, but that she's never going to be with a babysitter that either of us haven't met in advance and spent some time with and seen Mabel around. Like, that's just not an option. And so if he does book in a babysitter the day before, 2 days before, it has to be somebody that we know. Otherwise, he can't do the gig. And it sends me into a spiral of anxiety every time I get a message saying that he can't do his night. He's going to go do a gig, but I just have to learn to let it go, because that is how he functions. And usually we do find somebody. And I would definitely rather not have that anxiety, and sometimes have to, if it happens like 4 days in advance, we might have to interview new babysitters in that time because no one's available because we haven't planned it in advance. But equally, things might come up for me and I might need that at some point. So just have to learn to be a bit more easygoing, but very clear with the rules and the boundaries of who our daughter is going to be with.
So it sounds like you've got this thing where you've got some boundaries and lines that can't be crossed, but within that you try and be as flexible as possible. And you yourself, being the more organized person, have had to learn to let some of that stuff go and not sweat some of the small stuff. So it's a quite big journey, isn't it, that you go on as a co-parent, and your own ability to compromise and work with another person, and another person who you may still be harboring different kind of feelings about. That's a big task. And I'm always so surprised that we don't talk more about this transition from parents to co-parents, because it's such a big journey and yet very little is said about it. What has changed about your relationship then with Bobby now? How are you different as co-parents than when you were together?
I think definitely having the space from each other is really good. I think that we agree or discuss all the big things, but I have to just let him parent how he's going to parent. And I think that if he was here with me, I'd be trying to micromanage it. And so I guess I have to learn to, I think maybe it become slightly feral. Like that's the the atmosphere. Tops are off. Everything's a mess. TV, like we're just going to lean into being feral. And then I have to just be like, who says that's wrong? You know, as long as she's safe and she's having a good time. And thank goodness now he has his own place. It doesn't necessarily have to be in my place, which is certainly a relief.
So it sounds like then this kind of journey you've been on. So you've done this, what we call nesting situation, where you're effectively, your daughter is staying put and the two of you are rotating in and out of the house to spend your parenting time. But we always say that that's great, but it's usually there are a few amazing people who seem to make it work in the long term. But for the majority of people, it's a real short term thing. And it sounds like now you've both got your own places. So that can be your own spaces to create your own homes and your own time with your daughter. So you've now got two separate homes and you're learning to let be. So it's kind of like, it's not that you've got exactly the same rules in both houses. It sounds like you found a way of living with two different sort of sets of rules and two different households.
Yeah, I guess you just have to try and remember we both want the best for her, and who says what I'm doing is right? You know, that's what I have to keep kind of thinking. As long as she's safe and she's happy, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But we also, I think there's a big narrative out there as well around co-parenting, which is all about it all, children need one set of rules and both parents need to administer the rules in the same way. And again, it's quite, I don't know, it's like an old fashioned way of doing it, isn't it? Where you've only got one, your child can't possibly, move between households with different rules. But we know that that's not true, because in relatives and extended family and friendship groups, children do navigate different rules. They know that when they go to certain people's houses, there's a way of behaving that they have to follow, and they seem to be able to manage that. So I think it's lovely that you kind of bust the myth, this idea that, there has to be one set of rules and you've both got to agree, almost lowest common denominator parenting, isn't it? You've both got to agree. You've both got to find the thing you can agree on and stick to that. Whereas actually what you're saying is you can create two very vibrant, beautiful homes with different rules, and your child can navigate between those two houses and those homes and take different things from them.
Yeah, I think I just learned that I can't control Bobby. So
yeah,
I'm done trying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's definitely a very healthy thing for me. And he definitely feels some relief that he doesn't have to live how I want him to live anymore. He can. And so I'm just really trying to lean into that. And I think that's a really good point about when people go to different places and there's different rules, and we're both similar in some ways, but very different people. So she's got two different parents. She'll have two different sides of her. And I don't want to ever disparage his way or how he is too much, because she's part of him.
But that's a really good point to remember, isn't it? If we do attack the other parent, we're attacking our child, and the side of our child that is similar or like their other parent. I think it's a really important point. How do you think your mental health has fared across this? If you had to chart from when you were in the marriage but things were going wrong, to the breakup, to the early days of co-parenting, to where you are now, what's the mental health journey been like for you as an individual over that time?
I will say I'm happier than I've ever been. I feel a real peace, and I feel so grateful. I feel so lucky. It felt so overwhelming, the thought of leaving and navigating it. And there's moments of real sadness and loneliness, but I just feel such relief.
Well, it's lovely that you can paint a picture of there being more than light at the end of the tunnel, but a whole bright day by the sounds of it. I mean, that's incredible, because I know that, when you are at the beginning of it, I know from my own experience, you're right, it feels completely overwhelming. It feels like there isn't a solution. It feels like things are never going to be how they have been. But to actually get through it and to come out the other side, and then to be able to have a happy life and a life that's fulfilling, and to watch your kids grow, albeit in a different setup, it's amazing and it's incredible. And I think it can be really empowering as well. So I think this idea that you can be in an even better, stronger place when you've been through something like this is really interesting to hear. And I'm really pleased that you are in a better and stronger and happier place. It sounds amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think sometimes that's kind of the worst bit, is when you're in it and you know something's not right, but you can't even comprehend how to fix it. And that's often worse. And there was, I mean, it was definitely like, I was so sad about it, and I just couldn't stop crying. And but it's given me so much strength, I guess. And I think at first we tried to really be like best friends, and now we're maybe trying to put some boundaries in place a bit, because it's tricky. You want to definitely, I think you're so familiar with each other that you go into these patterns, and then you realize, no, we have to now treat each other how we treat our friends. Like there's certain rules, and the over familiarity has to end. And so each thing has been so difficult, but I do just feel so grateful.
I think you're right. The relationship changes, and you can't just transplant the familiarity you have when you're in a romantic relationship into the co-parenting relationship. It just doesn't work because you've lost some of the kind of things, that the oil that sort of greases the wheels, and then you've got over familiarity can really jar in those circumstances, can't it? So I think exactly as you said, it's about trying to create a new relationship that is a bit more boundaried, that has a bit more sort of respect and a little bit more distance. But that's once you've put those rules and those boundaries and that space in place, it doesn't mean you can't share or have warm moments, but it just means they're done in a slightly different context. And it just means they don't overstep the boundaries, and you don't get into very difficult territory again, and confusing messages, not just for yourself, but for your children as well. So I think that whole evolving of the relationship is fascinating and really interesting. And it's really interesting listening to the way you describe it now and just the different place that you're in. So I wonder where you'll be in another 12 months time, or 2 years or 4 years or 5 years. It's kind of exciting. Does it feel exciting for you?
It is definitely exciting. It took me a really long time to kind of imagine dating or anything like that. And that's obviously going to be a really difficult thing to navigate with a child that is mainly with me. And so I don't know how I manage that, but I'm excited for it, and I'm also just kind of happy on my own. And I think that I feel so much stronger for leaving than for putting up with stuff that wasn't right. And so yeah, I think if something's not right and you don't feel good, then it's definitely the right thing to leave.
And what do you think are the qualities that you have and Bobby have that have allowed you to stay amicable during this co-parenting journey that you're on?
I think that both of us are very open. That's actually something we're having to draw back on a little bit. We're having to try and be less open with each other, but that we really want to both be better. We want to be better people, and we want to be kind, and we want to improve. And we put our daughter first, and neither of us has been really greedy or vindictive. It's just been really sad. I really thought that we'd get there, and we didn't. And so we've managed to kind of do it between us. And I can't really believe it, but it is possible if you can both just kind of be sad together without turning nasty. I think as well, I think neither of us has really listened to, we tried to just keep it between us, because that was the advice we got from a lot of people, not to open it up too much, because the advice you get can make you kind of start to doubt the other person, or people are like, oh, you need to do this, you need to be prepared, what's coming. And we both really tried not to do that at the beginning, and we tried to just really do things between ourselves.
Friends and family always have the best intentions, but sometimes the advice can, as you say, it can polarize the situation. Nobody knows what's going on between you. And sometimes people are doing it out of, the thought that they love you and they want to protect you, but it cuts you off from the other person, and you need to stay connected and try and work it through together, as you and Bobby have done so successfully. Just wonder, I'm looking conscious of the time. We're coming up to the end, Harriet, and it's been lovely talking to you. Do you have any final tips or advice for people if they're listening and they're in this position and they're wondering how on earth they're going to co-parent? What would you say to them?
I guess, God, it's so hard because each situation is so different. I think you have to put the child first. And then you have to try and find your own happiness, and also try and want the happiness for your partner, no matter how they've hurt you or that you wish they would have done this. You can't control them anymore, and you have to learn to let them go. And hopefully it can mean that you don't have to lose that relationship as well, even though at some points they're the last person you ever want to see again in your life. It is nice that I haven't lost one of my best friends, I guess.
Well, also what you haven't lost is the person who, aside from yourself, cares most about your daughter in the world. And I think, that's the sadness, isn't it? If you don't have the other parent, then when anything either brilliant or anything sad happens, there is no one else that you can communicate with who feels the same way about your child as you do. And I think that's the bit that you miss when you don't have that relationship.
We get to share her milestones together, and we can send pictures back and forth and just rave about her. Like, we're her biggest fans. And so it's so lovely that we have that still. And hopefully we can maintain that. I think that just one more thing is just trying to have empathy for them. It's really, really difficult, but I think that's something we've both tried to do. And that's something Bobby definitely did by letting me stay in the house. He knew that the upheaval would be really hard for me. And so he tried to take that on himself, which was because he could just sleep in a bin, and I don't think he'd really notice, but he knew that would be
play to
really
strengths.
hard.
Yes.
Yeah, play to strengths. And so yeah, I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm sure it helps him to know that you're appreciative of that gesture as well, because it is a big gesture. And I think that's part of what makes it successful for people, isn't it? If you can play to your strengths and you can make those kind gestures both ways, not control things. But also, I liked best what you said about making yourself happy. I think that's what unhooks you from the conflict and the harshness of trying to navigate a co-parenting relationship. I think if you are happy, it makes the world of difference, because that's not predicated on somebody else. So I like that. Take control, be happy. Harriet, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing what is a really personal story, and I'm very grateful that you're brave enough to share it. So thank you. Where can people find out more about you? What are you up to?
So I'm actually on tour. I'm talking about the divorce in the show, but it's much funnier. It's called Everything Always Works Out For Me, and it's about last year, because it really didn't. And I'm doing the Edinburgh Festival for 2 weeks and then touring it around the UK. So the dates are on my website, which is harrietkemsley.com, or you can find me on Instagram at harrietkemsley.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And if there's anybody listening and they want some co-parenting support or advice, you can visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore our resources, or you can book a free advice consultation. And of course, if you want to hear more episodes, then you can subscribe for updates by visiting thedivorcepodcast.com, or find us on your favourite listening platform. Thanks ever so much, Harriet, for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for listening.